edition of DOST ITDI, and I will be your host, your moderator for today's session. Again, this two-day webinar was made possible by the collaborative efforts of the following institutions: DOST Central Office, DOST ITDI, DOST PCHRT, DOST Picard, and the DOST Balik Scientist Program. Before we start, let's check the number of participants here in Zoom. We are 145. And by the way, we are live in Facebook and in YouTube. Yeah. So just a few reminder for our Zoom participants, kindly rename your Zoom account into this format: affiliation _ full name. Again, please change your Zoom name into your affiliation _ full name. And also do not forget to mute your microphones to avoid interruptions during the presentation proper. Okay, so there was no training evaluation form given last Monday. So please do not forget to answer our training evaluation form today at the end of the lecture to secure your certificates and a copy of our speaker's presentation. So the training evaluation form will be given at the end of this session. Do not forget to answer that so you could secure a copy of the speaker's presentation as well as your training certificates. Okay, so before we start with our second session, thumbs up naman po dyan sa mga nandito last Monday ng ating first day of this webinar. Ayan. So for the second day, yan, meron naman pong nandito. So for the second day of the webinar, we shall still be learning about the bioethics on the use of animals in research, proper sampling, transport, and handling of avian species, which will be discussed again by Dr. Christina Laura M. Leeson from the United States. So, but before I turn you over to our speaker, let me give first a recap of our session held last Monday. We were able to get to know our Balik scientist through her shared experiences and background. And we've had a very interactive session with her prepared activities. She shared one message from a book stating that you have to begin with an end in mind. In doing animal research, you must really include a planning phase with lots of effort to be done before the execution of different experiments. You must plan your research in advance. First part of the planning phase is having an animal care and use program where you will be looking into different policies, procedures, standards, and guidelines, facilities, and practices to consider in your research. You must design your experiments based on the scientific merit, compliance with animal care and use policies, meeting goals for animal use of the 3 R's: replace, reduce, and refine. And consider procedures and activities that will minimize animal pain, distress, and discomfort. She emphasized that research using animals is a privilege. So lastly, she discussed about biosafety. Biosafety is a combination of factors and is composed of multiple layers of protection. With this, we must assess the risk first, and it should be continually evaluated. Today, let's continue to get the knowledge and know new information about proper handling, sampling, and transport of avian viruses. For the continuation of her discussion, let us welcome again on our virtual floor, Dr. Christina Laura M. Leeson. A virtual round of applause for her.
Magandang umaga po, maayong buntag po muli. I'm happy na maraming bumalik from last lecture, so I hope you have something more to learn. And let's also have another interactive session. So let me share my screen. Great. And thank you, Madeline, for that kind introduction. And then, can you see my slides? Okay. She can tell. Yes. Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Ayan, so Gumarba, this is part 2 of yung care and use of avian species in research. So I think Madeline gave a really good recap of last session. So I don't need to do it. Hopefully it will jog your memory of what we discussed earlier. So again, just to reiterate, our learning goals is to gain an understanding the principles that guide the use of avian species for research purposes. And for this particular session, I'd like for you to be able to enumerate some procedures that are usually done for inoculation, sampling, and euthanasia. So, the previous session, as Madeline and should be about the planning phase. So the phase 1, where you think and you plan, organize yourself. And today we'll be talking about more the technical stuff. What are the actual, hello? I say it says, did I cut off? Am I back? You can put it in the chat.
Yes, but you're back.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Yes. So so more on the execution phase. So what are the more technical aspects? So what do you think now? What are ito na yung the action part? So before we start, let's first understand our model, our model system. So what are the characteristics of avian species that are often used for research? So you'll see a lot of chickens in this presentation because chickens is one of the most common birds. And honestly, of all the animals I've worked with in research purposes, yung chickens are one of the easiest. They're like the medium size, not too small, not too big. You can still handle them by yourself, and you can. But they're small enough. You can enclose them easily. That said, there are also other species like turkey, maybe not pretty common in the US because of the turkey industry, because of Thanksgiving, right? So they always have Thanksgiving or it's tradition for the US people, for Americans to have turkey for Thanksgiving. There's also ducks, which is a smaller part of the market in the US, where in Asia is a larger part of the poultry industry, and quail as well, and also geese. And what we remember with species, a lot of them are very safe, at least the ones that work in the lab. So, and they prefer to be in groups to feel safe, and their behavior is very prey-like. So is very common for the characteristics are for prey species. So for example, housing right now, the standards for us for housing the birds cannot be housed by themselves. So it's not because they don't feel very safe. And so you have to provide, you can house them by themselves, but you have to provide a scientific reason why you have to house them by yourself. For example, I think earlier in the previous, there was one of the attendees mentioned oocyst cycling. So we've done it before, where we wanted to see the amount of parasites that each bird poops. So if it's to separate which poop came from which bird, so we have to house them separately. In that case, that was allowed. And then also, we'll go more on this with clinical science, but for a lot of prey species, if you look kind of weak, you'll be somebody's lunch or dinner. So a lot of times when I do the checking birds, I try to not disturb them and just kind of step and just look at them, because when you go closer, they'll try to run away from you because you're very big relative to them, right? And so you might be that they feel that you might be chasing them or whatever. But yeah, so I kind of step back because it's a lot of even sick birds can just because of their normal drive to run away from anything that's big and it's hard to tell if they're sick or not. So it's back a little and watch them from a distance first. Okay, and so one other stuff that is kind of important is the avian respiratory system, which is very different from mammals, and it's one of the most efficient respiratory systems in the vertebrate world because um, the airflow through the lungs is one way. So when you inhale and exhale, the lungs have two directions of airflow. But for the avian respiratory system, the air sacs, there are 9 air sacs, and they're listed here. It's not really important, but they're is that only the lung is protected by the ribs, and that'll be important to note when you're doing restraint or you're trying to handle the birds. We'll talk about that later. And then one other thing, a lot of swabs are taken from the oral and nasal passages of birds. So they have the usual stuff, right? The trachea, the entrance of which is the glottis. So it's like an opening and closing valve. And what's special about birds is that they have a choanal cleft. So hopefully you can see it on your screen. And so that choanal cleft, so on the figure, so it's very prominent. You can see it at the roof of the tongue. And for birds, that is actually an opening. So if you look on the diagram on the right, open from the nasal and the buccal area, the mouth, and so it's actually used as a convenient way for inoculations and swabbing because it's. Oh, did I cut off? Okay, am I back?
Yes,
I think I'm back. Okay, all right. So my Zoom says the internet is unstable. Okay, yeah. So the choanal cleft is like, so any nasal secretions will be present in the mouth area, but for mammals, right, the roof of the mouth is completely closed, so there is a lot more separation between the nasal passages and the mouth. And that's really important because it's a convenient place to inoculate and sample and swab the birds. It really is. Okay, so you've already planned experiment, and you would like to get your animals, if that is the case, if you are doing animal experiments in the lab. Okay, so first thing is, again, part of the planning is secure the necessary permits to receive live animals. And then one other thing we also like to do is when we receive the animals, you don't use them right away. So you don't run the experiments, the day of when the animals arrive. Usually you give them a week or two to acclimatize to your setup, make sure that the feed and the water are working, your enclosures are working, and they're happy with their environment. Because you don't want to be dealing with that when you already have what we call a hot environment. So when the birds are already infected, more they're just it's a lot easier to address any problems with your housing or any problems with feed or water. And then especially if your animals are wild caught, so maybe you got your animals from the wild, of course you need a permit for that. Or they're reared in open pens, so open area. They're not reared indoors. The quarantine may be important if you have other animals in your facility. So you quarantine them, separate them from from your existing animals, especially if you have other experiments going on, just to make sure that they're not spreading pathogens inadvertently to other animals. So one other consideration to consider. And for the chickens are like a species are one of the easiest animals to restrain, given that they're not as big as turkeys. Turkeys can be difficult because they're pretty big. Some of them can be, I think, 50 pounds or more, probably more. And they're pretty tall. But for chickens, the normal size chickens, the key is controlling the legs and the wings. So if you have, usually you just hold the hock, so their ankle basically, and then I usually you can control them with one hand by controlling the hock, and then using your thumb and your index finger and middle finger to pin the wings. Other people, including my professor for PhD, just uses the wings and holds them upside down. It's really up to you. You know what's really more comfortable. That floating in the air. That's and you're in control of the bird. That's good. That's good. You do you. The only thing is, don't pin your birds too hard. Remember earlier when we talked about the avian respiratory system? So the air sacs, which help the bird breathe, they're just found in the cavity. They're very thin and they're not protected by ribs, by bones. Only the lung is. So if you pin the bird very hard, so if you squeeze them very hard, it will suffocate. And you can, they can suffocate in that case. So don't pin them too hard. Because the air sacs can get easily compressed. And then if you need another person, especially if the bird of someone swabbing a bird, which also is a technique that I the legs with my hand and then pin the wings with my upper arm. So you can swab them by yourself if necessary, but if you need another person, no problem. Okay, so now you've got the bird, right? So you've got the bird and you're ready to inoculate, because this is the Institute of Virology. I use a lot of routes of inoculation that are used for birds. And so for respiratory and enteric viruses, here are the most common ones. So actually vaccines are actually delivered in this way. So eye drop using use a combination. So you put someone through the nose and sometimes through the choanal cleft. So remember, like the choanal cleft is this hole right between the nasal passages and the mouth. So it's super convenient, and it's also a way to get to the nasal passages without having to go through the nose, because the bird nose, because the nares of birds are on their beaks, right? And it's very smooth. It's kind of hard actually to get them through the nose. It is possible with good technique. You usually lay them on their side. And then you can also do intratracheal, so directly into the tracheal tube, and you can also do oral. And then one thing that you for very syringe, but the end is rounded, so you don't hurt so it's not a tip like a normal syringe. It's like a ball, so you don't hurt the skin. Yeah, so can anyone think of maybe respiratory viruses or enteric viruses that can be delivered through this route? You can put them in the chat, so that we can keep this this lecture interactive. wait for a couple of seconds. Yes, avian flu. Yes, that's from Brandon Allen Bellamy. Yeah, so yeah, Newcastle, ND or Newcastle. We do intracoronal very frequently. Yeah, you guys are experts. That's from Trisha May. Other routes of inoculation, and this can be vaccine. A lot of the vaccines can also be you done this way, or viruses too. You can do subcutaneous. Usually, it's at the back of the head. It's just the most convenient way. And there are actually machines that do this on the old chicks. It's pretty amazing to watch. There are robots that can do this with automation. And then one other thing is wing web. So the wing web is kind of sub-Q, but it's on the skin of the wing of the there's like the bird skin is pretty thin, and they use like a prong, like a fork, two-prong fork. And this is kind of like the smallpox vaccine. I don't know if they dip the vaccine in and then puncture the wing web, and that's how they vaccinate a lot of birds for fowlpox. Yes, and then someone also put alpha influenza virus. Yes, that's you can also do that. Okay, so other routes of inoculation, so many. There's so many. So no, there's also intramuscular. So a lot of times it's through the breastbone or through the thigh bone, and the image on your left is actually from a vaccination info website, and the instrument that the person is holding is actually it's a very similar instrument that it's basically back up for entire flock. So instead of using the disposable syringe, they use the reusable one, and then the hose is connected to a big bag of vaccine. Yes, and then you can also do intravenous, and this one is 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 kind of unusual, and it's usually used for pathogenicity index. So when you the OIE has criteria for certain for certain viruses, for example, influenza virus and the Newcastle virus, and they call it the IVPI, or the intravenous pathogenicity index. And then what that means is that if you put the virus in the through the vein, and usually you use the brachial or the that goes inside the arm, and then and that's so if you put the virus into the veins through the blood, does that affect the bird? Does that produce mortality? So that's a lot. Yeah, pathogenicity, the intravenous route is often used for pathogenicity index, and also for anti-sera production. So for whatever reason, people found out that if you put the virus in the blood, you can also produce a lot of good antibodies. So I don't know how they figured that out. They probably tested it, but yeah, that's how we produced some anti-sera. So that can be used for diagnostic tests or other research purposes. Okay, so I know this is so ovo vaccination. So in ovo, it means egg in Latin. And so a lot of okay. Okay. So a lot of flu vaccine. Who does anyone get the influenza vaccine like regularly? I know it's you can put them in the chat. Who gets the vaccine regularly? influenza vaccine. So a lot of influenza vaccines are made in chicken eggs. Yeah, so there's this whole enterprise of people who produce specific pathogen free, so really clean SPF, specific pathogen free eggs that's used for vaccine production for influenza. And then there are you can use for inoculation. That's really depends on which part of the egg gets the inoculation, either the virus or the vaccine or a viral protein, for example. So if it's through the allantoic, it can be through the allantoic route. So like the white of the egg. So you can think of all eggs start as the what you can think of when the table eggs. So the white part, the egg whites, that's the allantoic fluid. You can put it in there. So influenza, infectious bronchitis, which is a coronavirus of chickens, those are all produced in allantoic fluid. And then you can also, this one's a special one. The choroallantoic membrane is the membrane that surrounds the entire embryo. So it's kind of, it's doable. So what you do is you make holes in the egg, and then you create a small vacuum so that the membrane so the choroallantoic membrane is really close to the eggshell. So you make a vacuum so it drops, and then in that depression you put your inoculum, so either the virus or vaccine. Yes, and yeah, so a lot of like ILT, you can use that to make little holes of to make a virus. You can use the choroallantoic membrane route. And then last but not least, you can also do the yolk sac. So like the red of the yellow part of the egg, or the pula of the egg, you can put the inoculant there as well. Okie dokes. Okay, dokes. So what are the common samples? To have a rough estimate of how much they're eating and how much they're building body weight. So like when you think of chickens, for nutritional and management purposes, this is pretty much all that they do. They just do different interventions and see if the birds gain weight, which is mostly body mass. So we would love to all be chickens, because they put on muscles really easily. They don't actually gain weight in terms of fats. They put on muscles just because of genetics. But yeah, so for nutrition and management, weight is super important, almost like the number one thing that they measure. Okay, and then also temperature. So birds can get fevers, but it's important to note that to mammals. So for mammals, it's 37 degrees. But for birds, it can be 39 Celsius. Yes. And then usually for temperature, we go through the cloaca, which is the anus, as like the combined so the birds don't really have separate exits for urine and feces. It's all combined in the cloaca. So we usually get internal temperature using that with a baby thermometer, like the one that you see on your right, the one with like a little bit more flexible end, so that it's easier to manipulate. And then other stuff collect for bird experiments and also other animal experiments are swabs. We'll talk more about that. The blood, either the cells of the blood or the sera. We can also, usually depending on what your question is, we also collect tissue samples, either fresh or formalin fixed. And then depending also on what your project is, you can also collect feces, used litter, and intestinal scrapings. I think that's and those two are for enteric viruses. So does anybody have any viruses or pathogens really that are enteric? Maybe someone knows. Yeah, so like I think last time there was one who mentioned oocysts. It's not necessary. So oocysts are parasites. Since they're they're also very important pathogens. Okay. Okay, I don't see anything on the chat, but I'll give you some examples like the so chickens also have reoviruses, rotaviruses, a lot of them also like common like diarrhea like pathogens. Yeah, so salmonella, yeah, it's a good one. Though salmonella doesn't really cause disease in chickens. They're more of a pathogens for us. So they're like a more of contact like pathogens for us. So they don't really hurt the bird that much. Great, thank you, Trisha Campit. All right, so what are the other common swabs that are taken from birds? So we usually here the swab is super convenient because it's an easy target. So for mammalian, like for example, influenza, they do nasal washes, which are my connection is unstable. Okay, so for the choanal swabs are really convenient because, for example, for mammalian influenza, you have to do nasal swashes, which obviously nobody likes to put fluid in their mouth or in their nose. So you have to anesthetize the animals, and it's a little bit of a pain. But because there is a cleft, an opening between the nasal passages and the mouth, the choanal swab is super convenient. And a lot of studies have shown that even if you do like nasal swab, secretions for at least for bird species. And then other stuff that you can do is oropharyngeal swab. So just all over the mouth. We used to, for our lab, we do like swab the whole mouth, the top of the lung, and then underneath the lung. So that's I'm sorry, underneath the tongue. So on top of the tongue and underneath the tongue. So that's sort of how we do it. You can also do tracheal swabs. We generally, at least for my own work, we generally try to do tracheal swabs only once, and because it can cause trauma to the trachea. So we work a lot with avian respiratory viruses. So you don't want to damage the air passages and kind of complicate and cause it just because you sampled there. So generally, we don't do tracheal swabs, but there are instances where that's the only way you can get a good sample. So again, plan ahead, see which samples are best for your project. Yeah, and then the last is the cloacal swab, which is you swab the butt of the chicken. Yes. Okay, and so aside from the swabs, blood is also a pretty common sample to get. And then it's showing here one of the most common sites is the brachial vein, which is like the inside of the upper arm of the wing. Yeah, so yes. And large birds, you can also do the medial metatarsal vein, so basically the inside of their ankle. You can also do that. You can also administer like intravenous drugs through there as well. And then we also do jugular vein, especially if the birds are kind of small. But the jugular vein is just so close to the neck and the head, we generally do it for so the jugular vein is like on the side of the neck, right? It's relatively easy to get. It's good for smaller birds because sometimes the brachial or the metatarsal vein is too small. But generally we do this as a terminal bleeding procedure when we're terminating the experiment, when we have to use get if you and then last but not least, I think this not least, cardiac puncture. I could not find a picture with a chicken, so bear with me. I know that looks like a rabbit because it is, but it's basically the same technique. For cardiac puncture, we use the anesthetic before blood collection. So we anesthetize, we use ketamine, I believe, for our purposes. And then, so the animal is knocked out, and then you palpate the ribs, and then go and puncture the wound. You usually go down, angle down, and then parallel, so that the needle is parallel, and you hit the and your anti-serum. So the anti-serum is making antibodies that are specific, let's say, to the virus that you want. You use, okay, am I back? Okay, so for exsanguination, you use you use exsanguination so that you get a large amount of blood. So when you're making anti-sera, and that's why there's also the rabbit is also a common animal for making anti-sera. And again, obviously, it's not a it's maybe commented, but it's only a terminal procedure. So the animals, after they are, you do a cardiac puncture, then they're euthanized after that. So we're not waking, you're not using the animals after they're done. Oh, so that's it. So we've already gotten the animals. We've already housed them in our facility. We've inoculated them, let's say, with your virus, and you've already have some tools or some information on what type of samples can be collected. So one thing that's also important when you're doing animal studies is knowing clinical signs and humane endpoints. So again, this is defined in your animal care and use protocol. Again, it's going back to the planning ahead. And you, let's say you know which pathogen or which virus you're working with, then you have some expectation of like what kinds of clinical signs that you're looking at. And here's an example from the website with a chicken that's in the avian influenza and the pathogenic version. So an example would be, for example, in your animal care and use protocol, there's recumbency and ataxia. So meaning the bird is reluctant to get up. So remember, birds are prey species, and if they see a big thing walking towards them, they will try to get away from you. And if they don't, that's a clear sign that the bird is not feeling very well. And that's that's also ataxia, so they're not responding to any outside stimulus. And if they can't eat or drink, that's also really important because they need to eat or drink by themselves. And if you also have some severe neurological signs, that's also a candidate for euthanasia. And then of what the clinical signs are, what the human, and should be able to intervene in a timely manner. And this is really important. So we don't remember, like, research is a privilege and it should be done with, with with care and compassion for the animals, so we don't let them suffer unnecessarily. So if someone in the study sees that, okay, this bird is not going to make it, then you intervene, usually with euthanasia, which we'll be talking with the next slide. And then one other thing is, if you see any unexpected or unusual clinical signs, then you should inform your veterinarian if it's available, so that he or she can advise you on what. Let's say you got some uh, birds from a wild source, so not indoor rearing, and a lot of those birds actually have they don't uh, acclimatize very well to confinement, so that if you see that the animal is in distress or is not eating or drinking, then you contact your veterinarian and see what you can do, so you can provide good care for your animals. Okay, so and this is from the American Veterinary Medical Association guidelines for euthanasia of animals. They categorize different euthanasia methods that are acceptable by species. So for poultry, it can be either gas inhalation, usually carbon dioxide, so waterfowl are really good at holding their breath because they swim, so they can go underneath the water. They're really good at holding their breath, so carbon dioxide is not suitable for waterfowl. You can also do cervical dislocation, which is basically breaking the neck at the cervical vertebrae. And it requires proficient personnel to perform. So again, like, training is important. So if you expect that you're gonna do this in your study, then it's important then you get training, and ask your vet. You probably know how to do it. And then you can also use a device, a euthanizing device. So instead of just using your hands, the Kirchner euthanize is easier. For larger birds, you will need 2 people, because one person is one person is handling the device, and then another person is holding the bird. So it's usually a 2-person job. You can also, other acceptable forms are decapitation, electrocution. Those are kind of self-explanatory. And then the captive bolt is actually a really big nail. You can think of it as a really big nail that's driven directly through the head, usually in between the eyes, so directly into the central nervous system, so that the animal is completely is incapacitated immediately. And then other types are injectable between acid derivatives, and you use the pretty much the same routes as you use blood collection. So instead of drawing blood, you put some drugs in, and yeah, this would be our preferred method for waterfowl, just because carbon dioxide and cervical dislocation are not really suitable for waterfowl. They're it doesn't really work very well for those species. Okay, so all right, so you've already finished your experiment, right? And it's time to do necropsy. Or maybe you're doing you're in a diagnostic lab and somebody sent you some birds to do necropsy. So a necropsy is basically an autopsy, but for animals. And so their clinical stats, so you examine gross lesions. So if there's any abnormalities in the internal organs, maybe the liver has some lesions, either maybe some hemorrhages, that's also possible. Maybe the heart is enlarged, or there are also, for some enteric viruses, you can also have really swollen intestines, which is usually indicative of some diarrhea if there's a lot of water in the intestines. What other gross lesions? You can also see some secondary infections sometimes. So like of the air sac, it's pretty common, like it's called air saculitis. And that's basically a pneumonia version of for birds, but this time it's not the lungs, but the air sac. So air sacs are those, it's part of the respiratory system, but it's not part of the lung that help the bird breathe more efficiently. And then you can also collect tissues, either fresh, so usually that's fresh, and then you snap freeze them. You can also do formalin fixed if you want to do more histology. And here are just like the very common instruments. So I actually got this from, if you look at the link, it's from the standard approach for poultry disease investigation. So a lot of poultry vets, they have this in their bag, some swabs, some vials for swab collection, forceps scissors, and a specimen bottle. So yeah, those are some instruments, example of instruments. Okay, so now you've got your sample. Is this handling and sample storage, you should also have a plan. Like, remember, begin with the end in mind. Also have a plan of how you're gonna handle the sample. So one important thing for when you are handling the samples, once you've already finished your study or you have samples, in the middle of the study, is to stay organized. And then if it's possible, label all your tubes and your vials and your bags and your boxes ahead of time, so you're not you're not in the heat of the moment when you're trying to do your study. You don't have to remember everything that you need to write. So just make it easier on yourself. Plan ahead and bring all the stuff with you ready to go. The easier, the better it will be for you and for everyone else, including the animals that you're handling. And then also store the and limit the access as needed to samples. So let's say you know that it's a virus that needs to be handled at BSL2, you're not going to take them in a lower biosafety level lab. And then here are just some tips for you. Like, I really prefer the vials with the screw top, especially for Sierra. It keeps evaporation low. It is a bit of a pain to open, but sample integrity is important. And then I just want, and then don't be afraid to use Ziploc bags or boxes as needed. Even if it's, just separate out all the samples in as many bags as you would like. I remember there's this project that was working on with one of our coworkers, and it was samples from the field, and they all put 40 or 50 hours to organize, which could have easily been prevented with just every sampling site, you just put everything in one bag. Or let's say you have one bird, you put everything in one site. So don't be afraid to use baggies. Yes, you can use the red top collection too for Sierra. It's usually, at least for us, we collect the blood separately. So yeah, let me read the question first. So Kimberly Neri from ITDI asked if we can use the red top collection tubes for Sierra. Yes, you can use that. But usually those top tubes are like, they snap open. You can use that to the blood in fresh tube that has a screw top with a rubber gasket. Just keeps the evaporation under control. Sometimes it's disappointing to like do all of that and not find any serum in the tube. That would be sad. But yeah, yeah, maybe for collection, the red top tubes are for collection, not for storage. At least that would be my recommendation. Okay, so last slide. So our take-home message for you is, again, like begin with the end in mind. No, I really like that. And then also match your research project with inoculation routes and different sampling methods. Know your expected clinical signs and humane endpoints. That's really important for animal welfare. Plan your research work in advance so you can prove really is researching. Not a lot of people can do this, so yeah, have fun while you're doing it. And then here are my references. These are different from the last one, so you might want to take a screenshot of it. And my email is on the bottom right if you want to contact me if you have any specific questions. And then with that, I'll end my presentation and open for any if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you very much for that very informative presentation, Dr. Layson. And thank you for the participants for staying with us. And we are now open for question and answer. So you could type in your questions on the chat box in the Zoom. Or if you are in Facebook or in YouTube, you can key in your question in the comment section, and we will read it for you and we will answer it for you. Okay. So for the first question po, Dr. Layson, you mentioned that research for interventions for fowl are usually done at the population level. How then does one proceed with testing of novel medicine for avian diseases? This is from Brandon Allen Martinez.
Yeah, so yes, that's a really good question. Yeah. So for at least for most of the studies I should say that I do, it's mostly done at the population level. We tend to use larger animals, but if you do testing of novel medicines for avian diseases, you still have to do you know, when you think about it, even for human medicines or for human interventions, you still do like large clinical trials, which essentially is like you want to make sure that this intervention or medicine works for most people. So I would say like the guidelines are relatively similar. Yeah, I should say like you still do large testing. Maybe you do smaller numbers, but you still do, you know, multiple testing, different groups. I should say it's yeah, it's fairly similar, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, I think Dr. Layson, that's all the question.
Yeah, I have
For
one
this
more question.
webinar.
Yeah,
Yes,
that was a direct
message directly to you, Dr. Layson, by a participant.
who I should send this to. I'll send it to. It's Pauline Saludo from UPLB, and then she
Okay.
asked like, what are the guidelines for using? Oh, is my internet? Am I back?
Yeah, you're back. You're back, Dr. Layson.
Okay. So I get like my internet. My screen says my internet is unstable, but she asked if there's guidelines for using fertilized eggs as research samples. Yes. So strictly speaking, like the fertilized eggs are not animals, at least for right now. So they're for right now, so they're not considered animals. Yeah, so you embryonating eggs. The embryonating eggs are not animals, but we use them a lot. Like we use them for propagation of viruses. We use them for titrations, what we call. So when we measure virus level, we use them a lot. So yeah, so they're not technically animals. That said, there is a new guideline. So the egg for our chickens, it takes 21 days for them to hatch. So, but now before we can euthanize the eggs by putting them in the fridge. As long as they haven't hatched yet, you can put them in the fridge, and then we dispose them by autoclave them and then dispose. But for now, what we for older, 17 days or older, we have to use CO2 because of for euthanasia. So yes. So that's maybe the only difference now, but yeah, you can definitely use fertilized eggs for research samples. And if there are more questions, I guess the guidelines are kind of vague. You can email me or ask more questions through the chat.
Yes. Yes, Dr. Leeson. So for the participants who still have questions to Dr. Leeson, you can email her. But for now, I would like to acknowledge the presence of our Deputy Director for R&D, Dr. Mary Montesa, and Dr. Annabel Vibriones, our Director. So, and now to present the certificate of appreciation to our speaker, may I call on Dr. Annabel V. Briones, the Director of the Industrial Technology Development Institute.
Thank you, Ms. Madel. And thank you very much, Dr. Layson, for your time and sharing your knowledge and expertise to us. So may I present the Certificate of Appreciation. Let me read it. Republic of the Philippines, Department of Science and Technology, Industrial Technology Development Institute, presents the Certificate of Appreciation to Dr. Christina Laura M. Layson, Malik Scientist, for sharing her expertise as resource person for the webinar entitled Bioethics on the Use of Animals in Research, Sampling, Transport, and Proper Handling of Avian Species, as part of the establishment of the Virology and Vaccine Institute of the Philippines, or VIP program of the Department of Science and Technology. Held online August 16 and 18, 2021 via Zoom, given this August 18 of 2021. Signed, yours truly, Annabel B. Briones, Director of ITDI. So,
Yeah.
thank you very much, Dr. Layson.
Thank you very much po, Dr. Briones. We made it. Thank you very much po. It's a pleasure to talk to you about
Yeah, we learned a lot.
Good. Thank you. That's
Yes.
always good to know.
Yeah, in relation to the project.
Thank you, Dr. Layson, and thank you, Dr. Annabel. And now to formally end our webinar this morning. Oh, yeah, it's still morning here. Let us hear from Engineer Reynaldo L. Esguerra, the Chief of the Environment and Biotechnology Division of DOST ITDI.
Good day, Dr. Layson. I think this would be the third time that I've seen you, but although the first two, we never had any interaction. The first one was when they were discussing with you the terms of reference for the Malik Scientist program, and the second was during the courtesy call to the secretary last Friday. Okay, and again, let me thank you for sharing your expertise for today and last Monday. But more importantly, thank you for volunteering your time to the country to serve back as a Malik Scientist under the DOST's Malik Scientist program. And well, unfortunately, the only thing I was able to catch on was when you were discussing about the fertilized egg, that it's not yet an animal. I understand, Dr. Layson, you're from in the Philippines. You're from Pasig, is that right?
Yes po. I grew up po in Marikina.
Marikina, I see.
Yan. Marikina, yeah.
Oh.
So, pero my family currently lives in Pasig. It's nice to meet you po.
I graduated from Pasig in my kinder up to high school.
Pero I did do yung kinder to high school sa Pasig. Yeah, that's right.
First, thank you again for well, I think this was the first time that we had a break. So normally we had this 2 straight days. Pero in your case, we had it last Monday and today. And thank you for that. And also I'd like to take this opportunity to thank those who made this possible, including our colleagues at TSD, Technological Services Division, and the Planning and Management Information System Division. And especially for the TSD, I'd like to congratulate Ms. Karen Cruz for her promotion sa TSD. Also, of course, our VIP team composed of those from the Environment and Biotechnology Division and the Chemicals and Energy Division. And of course, yung moderator natin ngayon, si Ms. Madel Ebarbia. Eventually, magiging Dr. Ebarbia na rin siya like her tita. We had her tita working with us. She's a PhD. Pero I think Madel would pursue medicine in this case. And of course,
congratulations.
I've been failing to mention this in the previous seminars that I'd like also to acknowledge the person who designed our background, our certificates. He's a chemical engineer, but he's a very good passion in art. In fact, if you check Top Gear, Philippine Star and Inquirer, you'll see he had been featured on doing his art using PowerPoint. Just PowerPoint, he could draw cars, he could draw a portrait. And actually, he celebrated his birthday last Monday when the first day we heard from Dr. Layson, si Engineer Joven Barcelo. And of course, to the participants who, I think right now we have 169 participants to this webinar. And of course, you'll get to see more of Dr. Layson in some of our other webinar series. This would run up to April 2022. Of course, aside from Dr. Layson, you may have heard of the Dr. Nadala, the Nadala couple, Dr. Fajardo, Dr. Rosmilio, and I think the only we're still missing Dr. Ilag. He would soon be also part of our lineup, and Dr. Pantuva. So again, what time is it in your place, Dr. Layson? So
it's at 12. We have 12 hours difference, so it's very easy to convert. So yeah, it's 11:50 p.m.
Okay, so it's almost midnight. So I think Dr. Layson will still have to make sure that when the clock strikes 12, she
like Cinderella.
So again, thank you, and we'll see more of each other in future webinars. And thank you, of course, to our director, Dr. Annabel, and our deputy director for R&D, Dr. Montesa. So back to you, Madel.
So thank you, Sir Ray. That concludes our webinar in proper handling of avian species, sampling, transport, and handling of avian species. Again, thank you to all who joined our learning session for today. Thank you, Dr. Layson, for sharing your knowledge with us. So for the participants, please answer your evaluation form, flash on the screen, and the link will be commented on the Zoom chat box. And again, you have to answer the training evaluation form for you to secure a copy of your certificate and a copy of Dr. Layson's presentation. Okay, so that's it. The training evaluation form will be just available for 24 hours. So you could answer it now. So this has been Madeline Ebarbia of DOST ITDI. Do like and follow lamang po ang aming FB page, Environment and Biotechnology Division, ITDI, for more announcements regarding the future webinars. Muli po, magandang araw at mapagpalang lunch sa inyong lahat. Thank you very much. God bless.
Tumitilaok na ang manok, hudyat na ng pagpasok. Paglilingkod na walang kapalit, sa bayan ng aming hatid. Tara na, kaibigan, huwag kang magpaiwan. Gamitin ang dunong bansa'y susulong. Ating abutin ang pangarap ni Juan sa pamamagitan ng agham. Ang kaunlaran ay makakamtan kung lahat magtutulungan. Tara na, sama-sama itaguyod ang siyensya. Maayos na bukas para sa Pilipinas.
Anumang hamon ay haharapin, mahirap man ay kakayanin. Sa pinagsamang lakas at galing, tagumpay ay mararating. Tara na, kaibigan, huwag kang magpaiwan. Gamitin ang dunong bansa'y susulong. Ating abutin ang pangarap ni Juan sa pamamagitan ng agham. Ang kaunlaran ay makakamtan kung lahat magtutulungan. Tara na, sama-sama itaguyod ang siyensya. Maayos na bukas para sa Pilipinas. Ating abutin ang pangarap ni Juan sa pamamagitan ng agham. Ang kaunlaran ay makakamtan kung lahat magtutulungan. Tara na, sama-sama itaguyod ang siyensya. Maayos na bukas para sa Pilipinas.
Ang pangarap ko ay maging piloto.
Pangarap kong magkaroon ng chief alternative for personal hygiene.
Pangarap kong magkaroon ng mabilis at murang transportasyon para sa lahat.
Pangarap kong masagot ang malnutrition.
Pangarap ko pong magkaroon ng effective communication means for emergency.
Pangarap kong ma-maximize yung renewable energy source and to reduce the carbon dioxide emission.
Pangarap ko pong maging scientist.
Ngayon na o simulan na, humanda sabay-sabay akyat. Hawak kamay tayo'y aangat, lilipad. Ating abutin ang pangarap ni Juan sa pamamagitan ng agham. Ang kaunlaran ay makakamtan kung lahat magtutulungan. Tara na, sama-sama itaguyod ang siyensya. na bukas ating iparanas sa bayang Pilipinas. Ating abutin